Welcome to another episode of the Harder to Breathe podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Dusick. I was the founding drummer of Maroon 5, but I'm now a registered therapist, author, and mental health advocate. With me as always, but in a slightly different condition than usual, my co-host, Doug Maillard. How you doing, Doug?
It's been a week. Let me tell you, it's been a doozy. So I'll run through the quick, gamut of issues. So I had an emergency hernia surgery last week, and then on the heels of that, I caught COVID. And so we had to move our interview today with great record producer Rob Cavallo from in studio to online. So those of you listening at home probably won't notice a difference, but we notice it. We like to see our guests face to face. So it's kind of a bummer, but I'm okay. I'm hanging in there. How are you?
I'm all right. I feel badly. Just, obviously, selfishly, I wanted to do this interview with Rob, and I commend you for showing up and doing it in the state that you're in.
I'm a gamer.
Certainly, yeah, you're a trooper, man. I got to hand it to you. If it were me, if I were feeling the way that it seems like you're probably feeling, I'd be laid up in bed and shivering.
Well, it's funny. I'm shivering. It's funny, in addition to all the ailments and things, I've got like a lot of cool things going on that this was actually tied to. Because before I went to the hospital on Thursday, I had to go to a callback for a musical that I'm gonna do. I'm booked it, and I got to tell you, I know that we have a nice long interview with Rob, so I don't want to let this go on too long. But I needed my therapy session with you because I have to be honest, I'm terrified.
Oh,
it's the first musical that I've done on stage since I was off Broadway in 1999. So we're talking 25 years.
Wow.
I've done little fun things here and there, but this is an equity contract. It's a professional job. I've got to go and travel and live in a cast house and leave my family. And, there's a lot to it that's tapping into all the old anxieties that I have, on this podcast we talk about, I have overcome or worked through, but there's still a part of me that says, but you haven't done a musical since then. So now we're going to see. But I honestly have been trying to practice what I preach a lot lately, much to the chagrin of my family. I think I'm already becoming like annoying with the positive, like self-help messages that I'm trying to take from our conversations and apply them. Cause I keep talking to my wife about like, we should not be afraid to try the things that scare us. And that's where the growth happens and all that stuff. And I was texting with my sister and had the same exact, she's like, all right, chill it, Tony Robbins. I'm like, I'm trying to live what I preach. So I'm leaning into the fear a little bit. I'm looking forward to it. Certainly when I feel better, it'll be a lot more exciting, but I'm embracing the fear and gonna, jump in with both feet.
Is this something that you would have felt really confident about at a time when you were in the zone with that, and it's just been a certain amount of time where you feel like you're separated from that part of yourself, and so it feels like, do I still got it, or is it something you would have had the same level of anxiety then?
Well, it's a combination of things. My career took a direction where I just got away from doing theater. I moved to LA from New York because I didn't love doing theater, partially because I was going through a lot of anxiety with it. But also I wanted to do movies and TV. So it's not like I've been trying to audition for theater and haven't gotten it. It just hasn't been a real important part. But during the strike, when SAG went on strike, my manager started submitting me for more theater pieces. So I started auditioning and singing, songs and sending in tapes and all the things that I hadn't done in 25 years, flexing those muscles. And this show is, it's right in my wheelhouse. It's like folk, kind of rock, but it's a big ensemble piece where everybody plays. I'm going to be able to, like the cast is the orchestra. So I'm going to play on stage, play guitar throughout the whole show, play mandolin, maybe some bass. So it's very exciting. It's perfect for me. It's just, there's that little part of me that goes, well, this is going to be this is the final boss in my anxiety video game of like, I've been able to do other things and I've worked through it, but now I'm facing my demon head on, which is getting on stage and singing a song in front of people.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you have been on stage and sang a song in a different capacity with the band many times, right? And think about it. You're gonna be in rehearsals.
That's one of the things that makes me feel confident that I'll be okay with it.
You're gonna show up to day one and you're gonna be nervous, and then there's gonna be a learning curve for all the things you're gonna have to become. At a certain point, are gonna become second nature for you before you have to perform it, right?
Right.
So you're gonna have this opportunity to acclimate to the process, to get all of those fears out. There's always a day one, right? It's not, you're not walking on stage at Carnegie Hall and performing in front of a sold out crowd without any prep. So you're going to, as warranted as those anxieties are and as natural as they are and everyone feels them, you're going to have a process by which you're going to work through that. And then the thing that I've learned about having confidence is that there's a big difference between self-efficacy and self-esteem. I don't know if we talked about this on another show, but self-efficacy comes from doing something and failing and then having to figure out how to do it and learning and then applying that. And then the wisdom and the knowledge that I've done this. I've figured this out. I've learned how to do it, and I can apply that knowledge as I move forward.
Right.
Self-esteem is just like believing you can do it, or somebody telling you you're great and you think you're great. It's like, but it's not based on anything tangible, like the ability to actually apply a skill. You have the skill set, it's in there, it'll come back, and you will have the opportunity to refine it as you walk through this uncomfortable growing period of probably failing a bit at first and learning from it and then applying what you learn. And by the time you have opening night, you'll still have the nerves, but you'll also have the knowledge of self-efficacy. This is something I've done a bunch of times in rehearsals. This is something I know I'm capable of doing. All I have to do is get out of my own way and just allow it to happen now. But that doesn't happen on day one. So it's natural to feel that way, to feel that like, am I going to be able to do this? Because you're not yet able to do it. You're going to have to learn how to do it.
But it's also an exciting opportunity for me to, it's like when we started this podcast and I had, my crappy little mic and my crappy, eyesight camera, and I've upgraded. And now I'm able to apply all this new tech. I'm a different person than I was 25 years ago. I've got a lot more tools in the toolbox to deal with the things that I couldn't deal with when I was 23, 22, And so I'm excited to use this as an opportunity to see how those things work, to take it out and really, stretch his legs and see if those skills are actually effective.
Well, I'm excited for you. I mean, I think these are the types of things that make life interesting and exciting and worth living. I've discovered, the time in my life that I look back on as being the most negative and have the most regrets about, besides the fact that I was obviously an alcoholic during that time, is just how stagnant my life was. I wasn't taking on new challenges. I wasn't moving forward and doing things that were growth opportunities. And in the last 8 years, there's been so much of that. And I've sort of gotten addicted to that. It's like, if I do something for a few years, it's great. Even if at first it was new and exciting, it's like, okay, I could keep doing that, but I want to try something new. I want to, it's exciting and it's fun to be challenged and to walk forward into the unknown. Whereas that used to terrify me. And the idea of walking into the unknown and being uncomfortable was something I avoided like the plague. But now it's like, when I have that feeling, it's like, that's maybe that. Sarah Bareilles said this eloquently in our episode with her. She's like, when you feel that fear, that's a good indicator of where you need to be. When you feel that anxiety, it's like, that's probably something that's really worth doing, because that's your body telling you like, here's an opportunity to grow. Here's an opportunity to do something that's going to lift me out of something I'm in and take me to another place. And that's exciting. And
also, I know that, I mean, like you say, we talk about that on Sarah's episode. I love musical theater. Like, it was what I was raised on, is what I grew up on. So it's not like this is something that I've been like reluctantly avoiding. And it's like, well, I got to check this off the list. This is all I did growing up, and I've gotten away from it. So I'm excited to go back to it, because it was the foundation of my acting career and how I found that I loved doing this. So the fear is totally not irrational, but not based in, bad experiences. I had great experiences. Just it's based on how things ended the last time I did this, but I've done the work since then. So I'm confident, and you got to come see the show so you can tell our listeners if I failed and fell on my face, or if I came through with shining colors.
I absolutely will come see the show, and I look forward to it. And, it does make me think, though, because you have some trauma around this, and I think that it probably would be helpful for you as you walk into this new venture, if you're not seeing a therapist right now, to maybe go back to a therapist and be able to have a space where you can talk it through as you're going through it. Because some of that is just, things that you're carrying with you that, as you said, are not rational fears. They're based on a certain trauma from your past that doesn't apply today. You've learned a lot since then. You're in a different place in your life. But when you are challenged, when something triggers you, it brings up old wounds, old fears, old things that
revert
that
back to unhealthy modalities, right?
Right. So, I mean, I think if you know, like, I'm in a good place and I also have someone to get some support from and work through whatever comes up, then you'll be firing on all cylinders.
Definitely. I'll definitely look into that. That'll be a nice support system.
And I'm always here. You can always call me up and say, Ryan, I'm freaking out. And I'll, of course, do what I can.
Appreciate it. I will definitely take you up on that offer.
So today, on today's episode, we have some really interesting conversations with a person I've known for a really long time. And we haven't spoken a lot in recent years. We've run into each other a few times in the last few years. But he's one of the most successful music producers of all time. The albums that he's produced have sold over 130 million copies of albums he's produced have been sold. He's produced most of what you know as the catalog of Green Day. I mean, all of the major hits of Green Day. He produced My Chemical Romances, the Black Parade, the Goo Goo Dolls, their biggest hits, Paramore, Shinedown, Alanis Morissette, Fleetwood Mac, Dave Matthews Band. I mean, he's just like anyone who has been a relevant artist in pop rock music in the last 30 years, he's worked with. And even some classic, Eric Clapton and Fleetwood Mac. And we didn't even talk about the fact that he worked with Black Sabbath. That was one of the first things he ever did as an A&R at Warner Brothers. Rob Cavallo, if I haven't said his name yet.
In
Rob
the
Cavallo
is no doubt.
Yeah. So Rob Cavallo is our guest. He has so many stories, and I think that we wanted to hear some of just the great stories as much as the vulnerable aspects, and so you get a bit of that in this interview. But he also was very willing to be vulnerable and talk about some of the things that were challenging for him and why mental health is a subject that matters to him and why he wanted to come on the show. So if you're a fan of music, I think you're going to enjoy this, but also if you like the show and the topics that we cover, he was very willing to go there. So Rob Cavallo, he's today's guest on the Harder to Breathe podcast. Anything else you want to say before we jump into it, Doug?
No, I'm going back to bed. So enjoy the podcast and send me good vibes because I feel like crap.
Oh man, I'm sorry. All right, well then, without further ado, here's our conversation with the great Rob Cavallo on the Harder to Breathe podcast. Rob Cavallo, welcome to the Harder to Breathe podcast.
Thank you very much. I'm doing good. Nice to be here.
So, Rob, you and I have known each other quite a long time. It goes back to, I think, 1996, coming up on maybe 30 years since I was 18 years old, I think. And in recent years, we've run into each other quite a lot because of Maroon 5 and Adam Levine events that we've both been at, most recently in Cabo, which was nice to catch up with you.
Yeah.
I'm curious, do you, is this a common thing with other people you've worked with? Do you stay in touch for this long and have a relationship that goes on? Or was there something special about Cars, Flowers, and Adam Levine?
I would say it's 50-50. It's a little of both. There is something special with Adam and Cars, Flowers. And I mean, I do, I keep friends. I'm not the most active friendship kind of guy, but I don't throw them away either. I feel like I have a good relationship with pretty much everybody I've ever worked with. It's a nice thing. I'm not really a troublemaker, I guess I don't know what it is, but Adam is like, I hold him in high regard, and I think he does me too. And so, and I do think this idea of, having signed you guys when you were literally still in high school in 12th grade, and then getting asked, you guys asking me to produce the Cars, Flowers record, I think it's actually really interesting if you really think about it. Even I was young then.
Yeah.
At least young in my career. You guys were obviously 17, 18 years old, and I was a guy who had just started producing records. I'd only been producing records for major labels for at that point maybe 2 or 3 years. I mean, you guys, Kara's Flowers record might have been somewhere inside of the first 7 or 8 records that I've ever made.
Really? Wow. I wasn't aware of that.
Think about that. Yeah. The first record I made was the Muffs. The second record I made was Green Day's Dookie. And then I think the third record I made was another Muffs record. And then the fourth record I make was Jawbreaker, Dear You.
Right.
And then maybe the fifth record I made was Insomniac or something. And then I'm not even necessarily sure. I'd have to go back and look. And then I think maybe Kara's Flowers. Boom, right there. Wow. Fifth or sixth record, you know?
By the way, I'm not going to let that slide that you're just like, the second record I ever made was Dookie, Green Day. You know, just a little fun project. We do it on the side.
Well, of course, we were absolutely floored that the guy that produced Dookie was interested in signing us to a record deal and producing our record. But you mentioned Jawbreaker, Dear You. That was also, if you remember, a big album for us, not on the scale of success of Dookie, but talk about like a cult classic, something that I remember us referencing that album a lot in the studio in terms of the guitar sounds, the drum sounds, and just the energy of it. There was something really special about that. Was that a big moment for you? It seems like it led to things for you, that album.
Yeah, Jawbreaker. Before I talk about Jawbreaker, I do want to mention that I think I forgot one other band that was also in there at the time, which was the Goo Goo Dolls. I made City of Angels soundtrack, and then made Dizzy Up the Girl, which was with the Goo Goo Dolls, but that was a big one too. But I think that Jawbreaker, you know, it's interesting. You know, the quick story of Jawbreaker was that, you know, indie darling, everyone loves them. Kurt Cobain's favorite band. They're the opening slot for Nirvana. Geffen Records thinks they're the second coming. Everyone's hyped. We go in and we make this record that's very forward. And then the album came out, suffered horrible backlash from the indie world. People didn't like it. And then the band broke up because they were so disheartened with everything. Yeah, it was like terrible. Now, you would go like, is that the end of the story? Hell no. What happened and much to my surprise, one day there was a guy, this drum tech that we work with, Mike Fasano, who's really the character. He's an amazing guy. The Jawbreaker comes up and I'm like, well, that album failed. I don't know. He goes, no, dude, that fucking thing was my favorite album. And that's what everybody else is saying now too. And I'm like, you're fucking with me. No way. Right. This is like 4 or 5 years later. Well, it turns out he was totally fucking right. I mean, I checked into it. Everyone's like going like, wait a minute, this record is like amazing. It was just ahead of its time. Then I find out there's this whole other set of bands that are being influenced by it. And then I started getting, you know, like Paramore called me basically because sure, they like Green Day and My Chemical Romance, but they really like Jawbreaker. They were like, and I started getting a lot of work because, hey, you did that sort of, you know, quintessential emo group. Because it was for the longest time, it maybe still to this day, it's always considered in the top, you know, 3 or 5 emo records of all time. Certainly a seminal one. And then to culminate the story of Jawbreaker, which is really interesting, is that so 22 years later, they hadn't played a show. There's a big festival in Chicago. It's not Lollapalooza, the other one. I'm not going to remember the name. But anyways, this big festival said, you know, in front of like 80, 100,000 people, we want Jawbreaker to headline on Sunday night. And so they said yes. They got back together. And this was the craziest thing. That album that failed, Dear You, you can go on YouTube and watch 80,000 people screaming and every single word to that album that nobody supposedly bought. It was like unbelievable. Everybody knows. I mean, I was like, what the hell? This is amazing. I felt so sort of like
vindicated.
I was literally, I don't know if I was vindicated. I would just say that I was emotional on the band's behalf.
Yeah.
You know, I was like, oh man, you know, that record was great. It affected a lot of people. And a lot of people really took those songs and lyrics to heart. You know, and they ended up now having a really good touring business. And, you know, now if I could just get them back in the studio again, you know.
Well, a story like that,
another one, it would be great.
A story like that is a testament to the philosophy that, you know, certainly from a business standpoint, this isn't always the smartest approach, but to not chase a trend, to not do what is the shared kind of conventional wisdom is the word I'm looking for, and making the album that you want to make. And a lot of times the album will find the people that it's supposed to find. The art that you choose to make may not be appreciated in its time or it may not be successful, but it will. The people who are going to appreciate it are going to eventually find it. And those are the people you make those records for.
Exactly. And I would tell you to take that concept even one step further. It's like, you can't always do it. It's a very rare thing, but I've been lucky enough to do it maybe more than a couple of times. But it's always better to be a leader, to be the first one. As an A&R guy or a producer, or even if you're just a band, be the leader, be the first one to do your style. I mean, you got to do your style.
Right.
And if it can be, especially if you're like, when you get, the reward is like tenfold.
Sure.
Like, if you have pop punk and then there's the first 2 or 3 pop punk bands and then there's all of them that come after, the first ones are the ones that get the most, right? Or you could say the same thing for like, hip hop, or you could say the same thing for grunge, or whatever musical style you want to have. The one that breaks through, the one that is the leader, the one that is the innovator. To me, that's the great place to find yourself, because you have all these choices. You can choose this band, you can choose that band, you can work with this or that. If you can make a new sound, I mean, look at what like, for example, Billie Eilish and Phineas did when they came out. That to me is just amazing what they did. They did the hard thing. They changed the way the mixes sound. They changed the way the bass is recorded. They changed the way the vocals are recorded. Everything about that project was a new sound. And boy, when it came out, it was compelling and massive. It's the hardest thing to do, is to not follow.
Yeah.
But it's the most rewarding thing if you get it right. It's just so great.
Well, certainly. I mean, having the career that you've had, I mean, we talk about authenticity a lot on this show. That's like in any arena that you step into, being authentic to what is, your instinct of what is going to be the best way for you to walk forward into a space is usually the one that's going to be not just consistent with who you are, but it's going to actually be the best product. Because if you're trying to be something other than what is authentic to you, it's a fool's errand. You're chasing your tail, really.
And it'll show up right away. People will call you out as a poser immediately.
Yeah, it's really true. I mean, I learned this lesson the hard way. And here's a perfect story to example. It is the Green Day story. So I'd been at A&R at Warner Brothers for a few years, and I signed some things that didn't work at all. And they were really because I didn't know myself as an A&R person. And I was trying to sign stuff that I thought was going to hit a marketplace. And it turns out that I can't do that. I'm not a person that can think this is going to hit the marketplace. I mean, to a degree I can, but not like you'd think. The better way to do it, I discovered, was to go, am I truly fucking passionate about this? Do I truly love it? And so when I heard the Green Day stuff, I was like, oh my God, I love this. And I love it because it's like the Buzzcocks meets the Beatles, meets the Sex Pistols, meets the Ramones, right? It's all, it's all kinds of things. I even heard Black Sabbath in there. I heard Cheap Trick in there. I heard all my favorite stuff was wrapped up into this one band. And I just would pop the tape in and go, shit, I can listen to this over and over again. And I think this kid's singing about something important, And so then I took it into the Warner Brothers A&R department, and everybody who's been around, who are older than me, said, oh, why do you want to sign a punk band? We signed all the best punk bands. We signed the Ramones and the Sex Pistols, right? They sold like 500,000 records apiece, like great bands. But that shit was over 10 years ago, right? It was like, and they were trying to help me. They weren't like bad people saying, no, don't do it. They just had their perspective, right? And by the way, their perspective is 100% valid. It's right? But it's right for them, right? And what's right for me, as why record companies should really listen to the young people that are in there, as the great guys that were my bosses did at that time. They go, oh, the fucking kid, he hears this shit. They're talking about me, right? They're saying, oh, he hears this. This could be, maybe it's a new trend again, right? Right. And I'm like dying. I'm falling on the sword over and over again. I'm chopping off my own neck over and over again. I say, but I love it. I think it's great. Listen to this fucking kid. These guys are great. Listen to this band. Like, listen to the way the bass player plays. Listen to the way I was like, selling every which way you could to convince them. In the end, my boss just said, give them a shot. They're selling some indie records and they tour a lot, and and he obviously doesn't. We don't want him to go be depressed or whatever there would be. And it wasn't even that much money, right, comparatively. And so they let me compete for the signing. And of course, the rest of the story we all know. I got the signing, then the band asked me to produce them, and then it was the second record I ever produced, and we sold 18 million copies, and basically started
Not bad.
not bad at all. We started that whole pop punk. I mean, we were the first thing. So one of the reasons why Green Day there were two really interesting reasons why Green Day chose me at that time. One was they were like, so you signed the Muffs to a major and you produced it, right? That's what Billy Joe says to me in the band. And I say, yeah. And they go, we don't know anybody else that has done a band like this and put it on a major at that time. Like, you were the first one. And they're like, so they like that. And the other reason I think they, besides a personal, rapport, which was nice, they were like, we hear you can play all the Beatles songs on the guitar. And I was like, yeah, I can. So they got me really high and I fucking played all of them. They're asking me, how do you play this one? How do you play this one? And the truth is, I can do it. I know I can remember millions of songs in my head. Literally 100,000 songs I have in my head. I mean, you could ask me to prove it to you right now. I could go get a guitar and I'll play. You play this one. I was like, okay, it's what they did. And they were like, so if you sign the Muffs and you understand how to produce this kind of music and you know how to play all the songs of our favorite bands on the guitar, you're probably our guy. And so that's what happened. And they said yes to me. And there you go. And that was me following my passion and showing my passion for the music, right? It had nothing to do with marketing. Matter of fact, at that time, it looked almost dismal that we were going to, the thing that I said actually to my bosses I said, I think if we put them on a major, if they could sell 10,000 on an indie that has on Lookout Records that had 2 employees, we could probably sell 50 or maybe 100,000. And if we sign them for a certain amount of money, and we sell 100,000 with a $4 margin, that's $400,000. We'll probably make $100,000 is what I thought. I won't lose you money. This exercise, that was my sales pitch in terms of being humble. Oh, let's make $100,000. I don't think we'll lose money. Of course, back then, CDs, the wholesale list price was $10. Mm-hmm. And at 18 million, that's $180 million gross to Warner Music Group at that time. Wow. That's the raw number. So, and then you could break up the money in terms of overhead. But in any case, what a business model, right? I mean, how many times can you invest a few $100,000 or 250 or 400,000 all in with videos and promotion, et cetera, et cetera? Maybe, okay, we'll call it $500,000 and then gross 180 million.
Yeah.
That's
a good number. It's a good return on investment.
Yeah.
Not bad at all.
So the music business has nothing like that now.
Right. Yeah.
Now it's the other way.
It's flipped. Now, that on this show, we talk about mental health a lot as well. And part of the reason why, it seemed like a good fit, there's a couple of reasons why this seemed like a good fit to have you on. You were telling me a story in Cabo about, now, a couple of years after that, you've blown up. Dookie was a massive hit. Cars Flowers was not a big hit, but right after that, in 97, 98, you had a series of big hit records, and you get nominated for Producer of the Year at the Grammys that year. So what happens next?
Well, it's a funny thing. I'll be very candid about the mental health issues that I was going through. I might have had a little bit of imposter syndrome, and I had a little bit of probably internal shame. I mean, I had a thing where, I was actually also diagnosed, believe it or not, with post-traumatic stress disorder because of a lot of medical things I went through when I was very young. When I was 3 or 4 years old, I had a sort of a blood issue where they thought I was going to be a hemophiliac, or they thought I was going to, maybe I had leukemia, like a blood cancer. And I had to go on these very strong steroids, which when you're 3.5 or 4 years old and they basically tell you you're really sick and you're going to die, and you have to take these drugs that that distort your way you look. I don't know if you guys know about that, but if you there's certain kinds of drugs that can take you that blow you out. It's like you look crazy. So that formulated in me sort of a thing that manifested in post-distress disorder syndrome, but it also manifested in this weird belief system that I had, that I was almost unworthy to have friends, and that I was very unattractive. Yeah. Whew. Anyway, I'm living it right now, which is not great, but so we go, so now and I figured I fought my way through it. Music was such a salvation for me, as it is for so many kids, right? That if during my teen years and everything, where I could go would be happy place would be to study music or play music or be in a band. It was like, for some reason or other, that like unlocked the key for me in terms of being able to be like higher functioning. Now, fast forward, now I'm a successful A&R guy and producer, and I get through all that, but I still have some of the residue of this weird thing. And what the residue was, sometimes if I was in front of public or a lot of people, this other system that was in the back of my head that was manifested through all this other stuff when I was really young, I know it's going to sound crazy, but it would make me panic and make me sweat. And I mean physically sweat, like sweat out of my, I mean, just waterfall. It was very much like that scene in broadcast news.
Oh yeah.
Flop sweat.
Where the guy starts sweating. I mean, I totally related to that character because that's what happened. So now I'm going up and I'm winning, and I'm up for producer of the year. And it was at the Shrine Auditorium, and I'm in front of like 9,000 people or 10,000, whatever that holds, plus television cameras, et cetera, et cetera. And I knew that I could be horribly sweaty if I had to win. If I was to win and have to get up there and say something. And of course, what happens? They call my name. And I would be wearing a suit, and I just would have looked like crazy. I would have had like giant stains coming around. I would have looked like multicolored suit with would have had a bat signal going down the front of my suit, you know, because it wasn't a dark suit. It was like a light gray suit. I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do to make it so that I'm not horrifyingly wet while I go up and get this award? Because I had a feeling I might have a chance to win. Anyways, what soaks up water? And I was like, oh, baby diapers soak up lots of water. So I took the diaper and applied it underneath my shirt. And I had 2 diapers underneath my shirt the whole freaking night. And by the way, it worked great. Nothing seeped through. I was completely dry. So there you go. That, you know, and later in life, I went and did more therapy and work on uncovering why I could feel such panic and shame over having attention. And I would say that that system I always think it's like right here is still there. It's just a lot smaller and has a lot less power over me. And it wasn't easy. I had to, you know, address things that, man, it was crazy to watch myself in the psychologist or the psychologist's office, you know, sort of watching my own ego defense mechanisms try to swat him away. Like sometimes I'd be really funny, or sometimes I get really angry or threatening, or sometimes I would be like really calm and cool and like playing logic games with him. Oh, you can't get to me. But meanwhile, that was all these things that my brain was doing to say, no, you can't touch this back here. This is too painful. You can't. And then there was this watershed moment where I finally gave up. It took a couple of days actually of just hardcore boom, boom, boom. Like him not letting me get away. And then what happened is it cracked open. There was no ego defense mechanisms left, and it cracked me the fuck open. And I let it out, and you know, probably cried for a couple of hours, but then came out of it, and I was like, "Oh, I was breathing." It was, instead of harder to breathe, it became easier to breathe.
Way to tie it together with the show.
You know, my relationships changed. My relationships changed for the better after that with everyone. Call this guy the super shrinker. He was pretty awesome.
No, he sounds like an amazing therapist. I mean, I've had several therapists in my life, and I can really relate to what you're describing personally, but long before I was a therapist, I oftentimes would go into the room as a client and would just do everything I could to control that space and to control that dialogue. Mm-hmm. And for me, it was often just, I would almost get sort of manic. Like I was almost getting a high off of just talking. And as long as I was, saying what was on my mind and thinking that I'm really doing the work here, I'm really talking about what's going on for me, I was able to just monopolize the time and keep things away from the things that were going to be actually really vulnerable and painful to deal with. And I honestly never found a therapist who was able to crack through that until I was in my own recovery and studying this stuff myself. And granted, I think that I was very defensive. And if somebody pushed me too hard, I probably would have just run away. I would have just said, "Oh, this person is not for me. I don't like the tough love thing. This isn't really going to work." So I had to be ready. I think you have to be in a place where you are willing to surrender to a certain extent. And it sounds like you were kind of going through that yourself, like trying to find every way to not be ready until you finally were ready.
Right. Well, really, I'll tell you what happened to me. I got lucky. I got really lucky, because what happened to me is I could tell there was something wrong with me. Like, I didn't like how I was feeling in general, even though I was successful and was doing things and had relatively good relationships. I knew that even the relationship with myself wasn't really right. And then how I got lucky was there was a friend of mine that said, you and I are alike. And I was like, really? And he's like, yeah, I went through this, and this when I was a child and I was young. And I went through this, and I had a certain kind of relationship that is very similar to you. And he goes, I'm going to recommend you that you go to this guy down in La Jolla. And I went, oh, wow, geez, and without going into all the specifics of it, I recognized that what he was saying, it was a gift. Like what he was saying hit me like, wow, he's totally right. And I basically called that shrink. Like, it took me about a week to get my ass down there. So I was definitely ready. And I didn't think I had anything to lose. But it took, with this particular shrink, it was a session was, you would go on a Tuesday, let's say, and you'd start at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock after lunch, and you go from 2 to 6. And then the next day you'd get there at like 9:30 and go to 12:30. And that's one session, right? Wow. And then you're supposed to do that for like something like 12 sessions. Yeah, it's a specific kind of a thing. And what he's doing is he's hardcore trying to crack you. Like, he's looking at your whole body. He's looking if you're shaking your foot. He's looking how you're acting. And it's almost like they're playing ping pong with you with all your ego defense mechanisms. And until he breaks you down, like, why are you shaking your foot? Or like, why are you doing that? Are you sure it's a very tough thing. Anyways, I didn't crack until the third session, the second part of the third session. And then when he got through, wow.
Yeah.
So anyways, that's why I got lucky, because I do think that, I trusted the doctor, and I wanted to get better. And I do think that it is very much a personal thing who you are, because let's face it, I mean, I've also had some shrinks that couldn't get me.
Yeah.
I've basically been lucky. I've had 2 in my life that were pretty awesome. One of them, I wish he was still alive. He was absolutely incredible. But he was more of a day-to-day shrink that I could go see, here up in town in LA, where the other guy was like almost like a destination shrink, and
a retreat,
and practice this hardcore technique that they developed. But yeah, I mean, for the listeners out there, I would say that finding somebody that you relate to, and knowing yourself that you're ready to face the demons and do the work is actually, that's a big part of determines your success. And I would also tell you, you're never done.
Well, that's something I wanted to shine a light on. Is one of the things you said earlier was that, a lot of times the belief is that we're going to go to therapy and they're going to fix what's wrong with me and it will no longer be an issue. Listeners know I have dealt with anxiety, and I can say the same way that you can, that it's still there. It's not like it went away. All I know now is how to deal with it, how to manage it. I know what it means when I start to feel a certain way, so I don't give into it. I don't get panicked because what is this? I know exactly what those kind of guideposts are. I'm starting to feel a little, shaky. I'm getting a little sweaty. My heart's pounding. I know why, and I know how to deal with it. So it's a really important point that you mentioned, that stuff doesn't necessarily go away. It's always there, but what changes is your perception of it and your ability to deal with it. So bravo in doing that work.
Thank you. I'll tell you, I have a one little trick that works for me, right? And it's kind of funny now. Because the majority of my healing literally happened like 20 years ago or a little more. I now have a funny relationship with that little voice that's not so great. I basically do 2 things. First of all, I tell him, "Oh, go away and shut the fuck up." I literally talk to him. I talk to it like that. I go, that's a part of you, Rob, that just is really dumb. And it's not based in reality. And it's based on old pain and old trauma that you had. That's not happening anymore. And then I do this. How do I know it's not happening anymore? And then I do the same fucking thing every time. If I can get to a window or if I'm outside, I look at the sky. I look at the tops of the trees. And as soon as you do that and you look out there, you realize, oh, I'm standing on this earth right now. I'm looking at the trees right now. And there's the grass and there's this, and I'm standing on the earth. And it just, for me, it puts me right in the present. Mm-hmm. And then I realize, and my whole chest just relaxes. And I'm just like, oh, okay, I'm here. Everything's fine. No one's coming at me with a club.
Yeah. No fight or flight necessary here in the recording studio.
Exactly. No one trying to kick my ass or threaten me or anything. It's like everything's fine. But it does take those two things. I have to first tell it to go away, and then I have to go look at the trees and the sun and the blue sky and the ground. And then all of a sudden I'm grounded again.
I do the exact same thing, and I've taken it even a step further because I live on a little bit of a hill here, and right out my driveway, if I look out over the valley, I can kind of see the tops of the trees and pretty far view. And so I've made a habit every morning when I get up in the morning, I have my... Well, I get up, I have my coffee.
I'm Ryan Dusick.
Well, it doesn't have to be a view like that for you to do this. The way to step on my story, Duck. So what I do is I go outside. I smell. I call it coming to my senses. I smell the fresh air. I listen to the sound of the birds chirping and the trees rustling in the wind, and I look at the air and the sky. And it's great. Before I do anything, before I get to my computer and start answering emails, before I, exercise or do anything else, I just go out there and allow my senses to ground me in the present moment and to feel connected to this earth that is so vast and so much bigger than me. And whatever's going to come up in the next hour that might be stressful or, get me charged up and feel agitated in some way, it's not quite as impactful because I realize it's so small and meaningless in comparison to this vast world and universe that I'm part of. So you said earlier, after working through some of this with your therapist, that it really improved your relationships. I wanted to hear a little bit more about that. Do you mean your marriage, your friends, your family, the people you work with? What did that look like?
Definitely improved my relationship with my wife for sure, because she was noticing some really, like some I don't even know if I would call them odd behaviors, but just things that didn't quite add up. Because anyone knows if you're dealing with someone that's either phobic or has basically some kind of a neurosis, they're not actually dealing with what the situation is at hand. They're dealing with other things too, back here, right? That cause them to act in ways that, like, if just on the surface, if someone's watching, you go, "What the fuck is that? Where's that coming from?" Right? So in my case, I think that I was so much in a lot of ways a people pleaser that I didn't have outwardly relationships that were changed so much. It was my relationship with myself that actually changed the most, because what I was really doing was throwing a lot of water on my own fire and suffering on the inside in a way that, it's also a funny thing. I mean, I was born in 1963, and I can tell you that it's a lot different than being born in the 90s or the O's, the way we were brought up. And so the way that I was brought up, and I'm not knocking it, I don't think one way is better than the other, but it was just the way that where and how mental health was dealt with when I was both early, in my teens, let's say. I was taught, you better fucking suck it up and you better get out there in this world and compete. Otherwise, you're going to be living in a tent under the freeway. It was like kill or be killed. Like the way that the intensity of what was expected of you, the way I was brought up. And I'm not blaming my parents. They were amazing. Matter of fact, look at me. They equipped me with amazing shit. Like they did great. Right. And I ended up doing great. But the idea of complaining about being afraid, or the idea of not dealing with your level of discomfort, you never vocalized that. Matter of fact, that's just the way shit was. And that's life. So grin and bear it. And I will say that I also learned a lot about how to deal with that kind of stuff, because sports helped me a lot. I played a lot of sports. And really, I played sports. Thank God I was like actually kind of decent at it, but it was really an escapism, honestly. Like life kind of made sense on a sports team to me. So you start with that idea that like how did it change me? So, and I was such a people pleaser, and I wanted to be successful, and I literally it was ingrained in me that you shall go and do, you shall go and be, you must. You are going to go to high school. You're going to win the basketball championship. You're going to, which I did. You're going to go to college and you're going to get a degree, and then you're going to go to job and you're going to support yourself. Right? That was in there. So there was none of this other stuff. The inside of it, though, on the inside, I was freaking in pain, just wrestling with myself like all the time. Right? And so when this stuff ended, when I got relief and understood, because the weirdest part is when you're in your teens and your 20s, I knew I was like kind of screwy, but I also, I didn't know how to wrestle with it. I didn't have there was no way to get above it. It was all consuming. It was like it was over me like a blanket, right? And so I guess it's a long-winded answer, but like when I took that blanket off, then all of a sudden I was like, oh, I can see this person in front of me. Oh, I was like, I had an ability to be more creative. I had an ability to be more flowing with both my energies outward and their energies inward. Right. And I know a lot of people would say, like, and a lot of people have said this to me. They go, Cavallo, what the hell's wrong with you? You're great. Like you've been doing that successfully since the beginning of your career, since college. And then I go, you're right. I was able to get through it, but it was under duress, like under massive duress. The duress is now way minimized. I can handle way much more. Like, I feel like if I would have had that shrink 20, 30 years before, I would have been free to be even more of who I am. I would have been free to have experienced even more great shit. So on the outwards, so the relation, everything got better from that point. And yeah, it's funny because I did end up eventually I ended up becoming chairman of Warner Brothers Records, which to me, and also chief creative officer of Warner Brothers Records, which was a hell of a great job. I think those things couldn't have happened unless I went to that super shrinker and got myself, like the bigger thing, got myself free of the entanglement of the old stuff.
Rob, I wanted to ask you, kind of steer the conversation towards producing a little bit and what that takes from you in terms of confidence. And I want to do so in the form of a story, which will eventually lead back to a question. So bear with me here. This is my American Idiot story. So it's 2004. I live in New York City. I go to the Virgin Megastore in Times Square to see my friend Gavin DeGraw's album is suddenly out and plastered everywhere. I'm like, oh, Gavin, big hit, cool. And, at this place, they play music super loud, and you're supposed to like see, they go up to a kiosk and they say, this is what's playing right now. And American Idiot is playing on the speaker. Now, I had a cursory relationship with Green Day. It wasn't my favorite style of music. I was a pretentious prog rock guy. I loved Rush. I liked odd time signatures. So pop punk was like, this is, whatever. But I'm listening to this album, and I think it was We Are the Waiting or something, and I was like, what is this? And I go up to the guy and I ask him, and it's sort of like that scene in High Fidelity where the skater punks have made this great music, and they're like, who is this? We're like, that's the little skater punks. And like, it's really good. It's like, shit. And I'm going, this is Green Day, the pop punk guys from the Bay? Like, this is amazing. And then the same thing happens with My Chemical Romance, where I don't have a relationship with, let's call it emo. And that song specifically, Black Parade, I was like, it literally came on the radio the other day. I was playing it for my son. I was like, listen to this song. This might be one of the greatest songs ever recorded. It's got, chapters, and it's got production. And I bring it back to you. My question is, as a producer, and maybe some of our listeners don't know fully what that job entails. And it's funny because that was how my and Ryan's relationship started, was he was producing my band. And a lot of that job is to decide what else needs to go on an album, or what needs to come off, or what tracks will help, and say, I think a mandolin will go here, or strings will go here. Now, I don't have that ability. When I record demos, I just keep piling stuff on, and all I know is I've done too much. I don't know where the sweet spot is. And so my long-winded question is, with songs like that, with a band like, I mean, certainly those guys wrote that album and it's amazing, but as a producer, for you to go back to what we talked about in the beginning of saying, let's break the mold. Let's do something new. Let's show people that Green Day isn't 3 chords at 120 beats a minute. Let's show this rock opera that will eventually become a Broadway show, for crying out loud. Where do you find that confidence to say, this needs an accordion, this needs an orchestra, or nope, that's too much, or you're playing too much? Like, talk a little bit about the confidence and the relationship that you have to have with artists where you can say to them, hey, let's try this, and for them to trust you with that. That's a lot of questions rolled into one, but take any of them that you want.
Well, maybe I could just answer the question based on a sort of philosophy that I've had early on. I think the only reason why I have any confidence in doing and suggesting is actually because I'm almost out of myself. I'm out of my body when I'm doing it. I'm like, I hear these songs. I see this thing that's like a thing that's in front of all of us. The band is there. And there's this thing in the middle of the room that's invisible, and it's the song. And it's the record. I mean, you can hear it, but that's the only thing you can do. I guess you could look at it on the the waveforms on the
sure.
going across Pro Tools or something, but that's certainly no fun. And I just like kind of get excited. I have a filter. I'm always trying to think to myself, like, how do I service this band? How do I service this band's music? How do I use the incredible race car that you can get to the finish line with, or you could crash into a tree, you could crash off the course, which is the recording studio, to use the technology of a recording studio to get them to sound their best. What do I think and what do they think is their best, right? So I don't do it alone. And I do a lot of talking, and I ask a lot of questions, and I do a lot of listening, and I formulate my own ideas. Like, I can tell you that when I listened to the demos of Dookie, let's say Green Day, I thought to myself, oh, you really want to hear everything. You want the drums and the bass are playing all the counter melodies. Mm-hmm. The guitar is kind of jackhammering up and down. And then Billy's voice. What bands are like that? And I was like, oh, it's kind of like Black Sabbath. Black Sabbath, you can hear the bass and the guitars and the drums, like especially early Black Sabbath. You can really hear everything. And I thought it was really important that you hear everything, because some great, there's this other idea, like look at Van Halen 1. There's actually sort of a sheen of reverb. Now, I love Van Halen 1. It's fantastic, and that couldn't be any better, right? And the drums are actually, the kick drum is kind of a poof. It's not like a hard tight one. I mean, it is tight, but it's not mixed in such a way that it's just like I'm listening for that kick drum, and I'm listening. Not certainly if you go to a Neil Peart Rush album, you want to hear it's tight and dry, right? So I was like, well, Green Day is somewhere more Black Sabbathy, and then I was like, I heard, I got no motivation, and I was thinking that surrender. And I was like, oh, that's like Cheap Trick, and I'm like, so what do I got to do? Right. And then while we're sitting there thinking, so that's one thing I do about that. And then when I look at, certainly American Idiot's a much more expansive thing, or Black Parade's a more expansive thing. And it literally comes out of conversations where I'm like, what do you guys think about this song? What do I think about this song? And let's converse, and let's hold the song out in the air like a sculpture, and let's everybody put our hands on it and shape it. And let's just take the best ideas.
That's awesome.
That's basically it. We just go in there and start shaping music. I always say I like to bend music around, because you can. If you get to a certain point, you'll be able to be fearless in going like, wait a minute, should we do a breakdown here, or should we write a new bridge? Wait, maybe we should change keys. Oh, I have a whole idea. Let's do a scene change for this particular section of the song where except for one instrument and the drums and bass, all new instruments are going to come in, right? And I immediately go, oh my God, how did I think of that? And then I go like, oh, I know why. Did you ever listen to Sgt. Pepper's? So first you hear this sounds of an audience, and then you hear a fucking beautiful, like a cracking drum and kick drum snare thing with this amazing like dominant 7 chord, and then a lead da 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 doom doom da 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 down boom ba ba. It was 20s, right? Go today, and then you're hearing a rock song. You're hearing a rock song for a while, and then this new section comes in, and guess what? It's just horns. You hear ba 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 ba, and you hear the audience again. And you're like, where did the rock band go? I don't know. I don't care. I buy it. I love it, right? But it's so imaginative. It's so amazing. So it's like, why limit yourself to anything you can imagine? And then when you start to realize that your imagination is actually quite powerful, and you're not just stuck with, which isn't a bad thing at all. Trust me, I love, three, guitar, bass, drums music. That's still my favorite shit of all time. I think that once you learn to extend that imagination and then roll with it and try to make it happen, just watch what happens to your music. You'll surprise yourself.
This is bringing me back to so many conversations we had in making the album The Fourth World in such a wonderful way, because I remember I had a very limited vision of what I wanted my drum parts to sound like, and we each had a very distinct image in our mind of what that record was going to sound like. And of course, you were a lot more experienced, and you were really the first producer we worked with. I mean, we had worked with one other production duo before that, but this was obviously our first record deal, major producer, major label. And I remember the conversation about Van Halen 1. I wanted my kick drum on the first record we made to sound like Dave Aberzees and Pearl Jam. I wanted it to have that click and that punch to it. And you had the clarity to recognize, like, that's like a second or third album kind of production style, when things are really tight and you can kind of take it to the next level. Like, you guys are in your sort of garagey phase still. Like, it needs to have a little bit of that sort of sheen on it, that it obscures, it's not too on the nose. And I didn't know what you were talking about at the time. And then I heard it when it was mixed, and I recognized, like, okay, he heard this all along. He knew what kind of band we were at this moment in our career. And it leads me to a question that I wanted to ask you that's half serious and half joking, but there's some seriousness in it. So you had produced Green Day, Jawbreaker, The Muffs. You'd done a lot of guitar, bass, and drums, straight ahead rock and roll kind of stuff. And we were more or less that kind of band, but we shared with you this love of the Beatles and everything you're describing in terms of bringing in a horn section, bringing in a string section, being audacious and going in a lot of different directions. And I know that we were just young enough and naive enough to think, like, hey, why not? Let's just do whatever we want to do. And we have this big budget with a major label. And you brought in David Campbell to arrange strings on 4 tracks on The Fourth World. And that was obviously a huge coup for us to be able to do that. It didn't obviously turn into big success for us, but in the following year, you have Green Day's Good Riddance, Time of Your Life, which has a string section on it. You have Goo Goo Dolls' Iris, which was a big hit, which had David Campbell as well, right? You had an Alanis Morissette track with David Campbell strings. So my half-serious question is, did Cars Flowers, without having a hit, change the course of pop music by insisting that you bring in a string section?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. Yeah, I mean, your answer is actually, partially correct, because I mean, I can't be so bold as to say I changed pop music, but I will tell you this. I think you influenced the creation of a lot of hits, because that was the first time I had worked with David Campbell, was on Cars Flowers. And I remember researching, I was like, well, who should I get to do? And I started, get to do strings with, and who's going to be cool. And then I heard that, this guy was Beck's father. Mm-hmm. I even heard that he looks a lot like Beck, which he really does. Yeah. And so I got a bunch of different guys on the phone, and I was like, this David Campbell guy is great. And so what happened is, and this is where I think you're right, is to this day, like, I still basically have a love affair with David Campbell and a lot of other people. Like, we've never failed to get a good arrangement, him and I together. And our conversations, which started on that Cars Flowers record, and certainly did then go to Iris and Uninvited with Alanis and Good Riddance and all these other things. Even if you go all the way to the Black Parade, of which there's like some ridiculous 257 tracks where there's orchestral percussion and a marching band and horns and strings and glockenspiel and every other frickin' spiel you could imagine, right? They're all on there because that was the idea, right? Yeah, that was the idea of the song. The concept of the song actually sort of demanded that. Well, that's him and me, actually, and the band, of course. But we're like I'm there with David, and I can read a score. I know how to read, so I can read the score and go, oh, this one, and oh, let's do this. And, even Tarzan, You'll Be in My Heart, with Phil Collins was a song where him and I got together and did a big thing. So in that way, I think that, yeah, having you guys say, let's do strings, bringing in David Campbell formulated a relationship that then continued on and created a lot of hits that a lot of songs records we all know. So maybe you're right.
I think that's a yes, Ryan. I think Karis Flowers is ground zero for modern music.
You should. There's actually one other small tidbit that's kind of interesting, and it's been written about a lot in different guitar magazines. But I don't know if you remember this, but we were at A&M Studios, and Taylor Guitars first started making acoustics, and Adam had that song. What was it? So my dear,
To Her With Love.
And he was like, I need a good acoustic. And, everybody basically was broke, except at that point, me. I started to have some money. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm a producer that doesn't have really one good acoustic guitar. And at A&M Studios, Taylor had put a bunch of acoustic guitars in the front office. And they were like, just use them. They're good. They're here. It's a new company that, they're really cool. So
Taylor.
So we recorded this Taylor on To Her With Love. And I was like, oh my God, this is a great sounding acoustic. And it doesn't sound like a Gibson, and it doesn't sound like oh my God, what's the other one
Martin.
that I don't even, it doesn't sound like a Martin, right? It's like, it's its own thing. And I fell in love with this guitar called the 514C. So I called the company. I said, you know what, just send me over 3 or 4 of these things. There was a great guy named Bob Borbonis. I always remember that guy's name. Such a crazy name. And he was like the rep, and he also worked at A&M Studios. And he was like, all right, they sent over 3, pick one, and we'll give you an artist deal. And so I did. And I picked that guitar. Well, that's the guitar that's on Time of Your Life. That's the guitar that's on Alanis Morissette. That's the guitar that's on 9 big #1 hits. And then Eric Clapton on a song called Blue Eyes Blue picked up that guitar, said, oh, I like this one, went outside, played the solo on Blue Eyes Blue, which is featured in the Runaway Bride soundtrack, and was probably one of his last big hits. And then he borrowed the guitar for 6 months to go score a movie with it. And I was so nervous. I was like, oh my God, am I going to get this back? Because maybe he likes it too much, and maybe it's a gift. I don't know, And no, 6 months later, he gave it back to me, and he was like, dude, that's a great guitar. And I was like, wow. So and then at one point, Billy Joe dubbed it Excalibur. He called it, oh, that guitar is Excalibur. And because it's like, if you need your sword to be pulled and you need a great acoustic. So that guitar is in the other room right now. And it is, it's strangely beat up. I didn't take like the best care of it, but does it still sound like it did back in those days? Yeah. And that guitar is now 30 years old. And that also came from the Karis Flowers session.
Wow.
Actually, wait, I think I might have told that story wrong. I didn't record To Her With Love with the one that they gave me. I waited to get the one that I bought. So To Her With Love is the first time that was on record. So that is the Green Day Time of Your Life guitar is also the To Her With Love guitar.
You know what my first memory of that guitar was walking into the studio at A&M one day, a little late to the session. You were tracking guitars, and you're sitting in the control room, and Lindsey Buckingham is sitting on the couch playing that guitar. And I was like, oh my God. And you were working with Fleetwood Mac at the time, at the same time, right? It was their big reunion, the classic lineup.
Yeah, that's crazy. Wow. I didn't even realize those were overlapping. But yeah, what happened there, the quick story is that, the leaders of Warner Brothers Records at that time, during that year of 96-ish or whatever it was, they left Warner Brothers Records and they went to go start DreamWorks Records, and with Spielberg and Katzenberg and Geffen and all those guys. Mm-hmm. And they said to me, you should come. And I was like, I don't know, it's like, I really don't want to leave my bands. I was like, I had Green Day and Goo Goo Dolls, and I had some other things. And long story short, I made the decision to stay. And then when I made the decision to stay at Warner Brothers, this amazing thing happened, because all of the other, like, I was the last A&R guy and staff producer guy to be trained in the classic ways of Warner Brothers. So Ted Templeman and Lenny Waronker, these amazing guys, Richard Perry, Tommy LaPuma, these unbelievable producers taught me a lot about record production, right? And so now all those guys have left, and I'm this like young kid. I'm like 28 or 9 or something, right? And the now president of Warner Brothers Records says, "Hey, we need somebody to work with Lindsey Buckingham. Like, who are we going to get?" And it was like, "Cavallo, you do it," because I was the only person left in the A&R department that had that kind of credibility, at least some credibility with music, and everyone was sort of afraid of Lindsey because he's, a fucking genius, and he basically is the main producer guy on Rumors, which is one of the top 3 selling albums of all time. I mean, it's like it's kind of heady stuff. So by default, really, I ended up all of a sudden being promoted to senior VP of A&R, like quickly, and I'm talking about in the span of months. I went from like A&R rep to senior VP of A&R, pretty much, or A&R manager, whatever the hell he was. I was a low guy to a top guy immediately, because what's the quote? The universe, abhors a vacuum. You know what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. And so it's like, if the universe abhors a vacuum, there was a vacuum above my status in the A&R department that needed to be filled. So I was like, whoosh, I was brought up to fill that space like really quickly. And the next thing you know, like, Lindsey wasn't that scary. He was fucking great. And he said, "Oh, you can play the guitar and you have ideas." He's like, he basically told me, even literally the other day, he goes, "You had it together. When I first met you, motherfucking kid, you had it together." I was like, "Wow, you thought that?" He's like, "Yeah, why do you think I hired?" So I was like, "Thanks, man." He was like, No, you were cool. I wanted to work with you. So like, let's go in and make a record." And then that turned it. And then while we were making that record, we had that big thing with Eric Clapton again, where he had done Eric Clapton Unplugged with MTV. And I said, "Oh, wow, Fleetwood Mac had been broken up for 12 or 14 years or something, and no one was doing anything, and everyone was separate." And I had this crazy idea. Well, why don't we, instead of doing Unplugged for Fleetwood Mac, why don't we do Fleetwood Mac just like a kind of a thing where we're going to do 12 of their greatest songs plus 2 or 3 new ones. And I'm going to call MTV, and I'm going to get a big soundstage on Warner Brothers film department, like over in the movies. Mm-hmm. And we're going to build a stage, and we're going to invite like half of, of Hollywood and the cast of Friends or whoever, and Courtney Love or whoever was hot at the time, and put them in the audience and have them and film this sucker, and then put it on MTV as like, and because Eric Clapton's Unplugged sold like 20 million albums and had massive hits, and it was like unbelievable. He did a different version of Layla. Mm-hmm. And I know it sounds like there's like stuff dreams are made of in a certain way, but I called the prospective managers, and then the next thing you know, I said to everybody, I said, "Have the band come to my house. I'm making spaghetti and meatballs." This is a true story. And so, because I still can't believe where, for me, in a certain way, I had the balls to do this kind of shit, but I did. And I realized now I could explain it now, Monday morning quarterbacking, why all this happened. I see the cogs of the wheels and why it made sense to have the kid who, present the band with this, as opposed to the managers, even though they did to a certain degree. They're like, "Yeah, go over and see that guy. He's probably good." And I heard that Lindsey was saying, "I'm in with this new producer guy. It's having all these hits. He's selling 20 million every time he goes in the studio, blah, 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 blah." And so they were interested. So now Christine comes in my house, Stevie comes in my house, Mick comes in my house. He's like 6'10", he's the nicest motherfucker you ever met in your life. John McVie comes in the house, and Lindsey comes in the house. And I'm around the table. I'm like, "Guys, thanks for coming here. I want to give you a proposal." And I said, "If we get this band back together, you guys should be back together." And I saw them kind of like, But no, I said, "I have an idea." I said, "If we go to MTV and we tell them we're going to do 12 of your greatest hits, we're going to put you all on stage, we're going to invite half of Hollywood, the whole thing. We're going to get 12 cameras, and then plus 2 new songs. What I think is going to happen is we're probably going to sell 10 million records, and then you guys will be able to go on tour and probably like gross like like $200 million. And it'll be a launching pad. And they looked at me, they're like, this sounds like it could be okay, but why would MTV say yes? And I say, well, guess what? Here's the good news. MTV already said yes. And they were like, really? They almost couldn't believe it at first because, the business was a little different back then. People didn't know necessarily what the value of a band, if it's like the late 90s, right? Or it's 96 or 7, and your band was making its hottest records like 72 and 74, 75, 76, and a little in the 80s, right? Well, certainly some in the early 80s, right? When it's the late 90s, as we all know that bands like, they might feel like, hey, wait a minute, it's not our time anymore. Like it's a little, like, who cares about us? Or what should we sound like? Should we sound like us? Should we sound like, what the hell do we, what do we do? We all bands go through this. So the idea that there was this fucking kid sitting in front of him saying, I got MTV and it's going to be great. And all we want you to be is you. And we're going to celebrate you. I think for them, that was heady stuff. Like, and they could see my enthusiasm for it. And they could see that I had already pre-sold it basically around the world with the powers that be. So they were like, Warner Brothers wants to do this. MTV wants to do this. You want to do this.
Why don't we want to do
fucking do it? So that's kind of why Lindsey Buckingham was sitting there holding that guitar. Because it started with me. I was just producing him as a solo act, and then we turned it into that thing we call the dance, which, by the way, did do exactly what we said.
Absolutely.
Came out, sold like 12 million records, and the tour went and grossed bazillions.
And I got to imagine Rumors probably had a nice bump too when people were discovering Fleetwood Mac for the first time, going
Next
back and
generation.
buying the old catalog.
Absolutely. And then it led to subsequent records with, we had hits with, and which, and great touring and all kinds of things. And it was a really good time. It was a really heady time. I felt really blessed to be around there and just to be like, just doing, I think what was my part is just trying to be, an A&R guy that was trying to help artists. Mm-hmm. Be where they could be the best they could be and be where they needed to be. And certainly Fleetwood Mac, one of the greatest bands of all time, deserved to be back on top and not separated all around, all over the place, just their legacy sort of being forgotten. That wasn't great.
Now,
so we
Rob,
changed that. That was good.
On a more serious note, in reminiscing about working with you and how wonderful that experience was and how much we learned working with you on The Fourth World, I also remember, of course, that there was another wonderfully talented person in the room, our engineer and mixer, Jerry Finn, who went on to do huge things with Blink-182 and other bands, and then died suddenly of a brain hemorrhage at the age of 39. And I know he was something of a kind of a protege to you, that you worked with him and he was kind of like under your wing and then went off and did his own thing and had a lot of success as you did. I wonder what the loss of him, what impact that had on your life.
It wasn't great. Him and I had a very amazing relationship and complicated relationship. We did a lot of growing together. So the one thing that's probably worth telling is like how he came to be. I was doing that first record with the Muffs, and he was a runner at Devonshire Studios, and he was making getting people coffee and making like $3 an hour, $3.25 an hour, I think is what he told me. And then I went up to Fantasy Records in the Bay Area to do Dookie. We tried to mix it up there, but for various technical reasons, there was a bass compression ceiling we didn't understand. We couldn't get the mix right. Mm-hmm. So I said to the band, and the band also agreed with me, that was like, why don't we just go back and mix it where I mix the Muffs? Because you guys like what that sounds like, and I know that room. There won't be any technicalities or technical complications. They said, okay, let's go down. So I remember Jerry, and I was like, I called the gal that was the studio manager, and I said, can I request Jerry to be my second engineer for this? because he's cool and he'll get along with the Green Day guys. And she said, sure, you can have him. So now we're in there mixing, and it's basically me and the band, and we're trying to mix. And we're kind of getting it done, but I'm so much more of a producer and can produce a mix, but I'm not the best knob twiddler. I'm not as quick at it. It's not really my thing. So you look around the room, like I'm stumped on a certain problem. Let's say it was the kick drum or whatever. I go, Jerry, what would you do? And he'd go, and he'd been there a while and had been watching all the other engineers do it and was doing the same shit that I was doing, but he was doing it on a mixing level. I was doing it on a production. I've learned production tricks and arrangement tricks and how to use the studio. He had learned tons of mixing tricks, and it turns out that he was fucking awesome at it. So I would be like, what would you do to this? And he'd go, well, I'd strap this thing across and I would do it this way. And then I said, well, do it. And he did it. And we'd be like, holy shit, that's fucking awesome. We keep mixing. And then I go, what would get stuck? What would you do here? And he goes, well, I would do this. And I'm like, oh my God, that's fucking great. After like the 4th or 5th day, I was like, sit the fuck down. Just mix the record. Just help us, just sit with us and be here. And so and he went from being a runner on the album, and then we gave him first credit. I spoke with the guys and I was like, you know what? He's really the more of the mixer than we are. I mean, we're in it with him on every step of the way, but I think we should give him the first credit and we should throw him some money. And the guys were like, yeah. And so that's why Dookie says mixed by Jerry Finn, Rob Cavallo, and Green Day, because that's kind of what happened. And then he became basically my engineer on subsequent albums. Not always my tracking engineer, but definitely my mixing engineer. And then there were bands that because I became really quickly, I became a staff producer at Warner Brothers Records. I was then, because they paid me money for exclusivity, right? If you're a staff producer at Warner Brothers Records and you're an A&R guy there, well, that means you can't really work for Columbia Records or others because you're exclusive. So other bands would call me and I couldn't do them. Like if Blink-182 called me, I wasn't contractually allowed to do it. It happened a lot. And back then, the pop punk thing started to happen. There were only a handful of producers that were making that sound successfully at that time in 94, 95, whatever. So 96 came around, whatever it was. And then people realized, hey, wait a minute, we could get Jerry Finn. And I said to Jerry, man, take those jobs. Take them. Take the ones I can't take. Go have a ball. Go see what it's like to be a producer. Mm-hmm. And he became just a fabulous producer. And it was just, I couldn't be the thing that there's two, obviously I miss him as a person, but the thing that sucks sometimes, like to this day, I mean, listen to his freaking mixes. Mm-hmm. Those mixes are great. Yeah. There's a lot of people out there that know. I mean, look, I'm talking like people like Max Martin and Adam Levine. And I was talking with Nate from Fun the other day, and it was like, or whoever it was, there's a lot of people out there that go, that was a big loss. Because the way he made a kick and snare drum sound against drums and guitars and vocals and keyboard, I mean, he had a thing. And he mixed the Fourth World. But he was also a fucking rascal, I mean, he was he was an alpha dog, he was definitely like, I was like the soft and fuzzy one compared to him.
Right.
We were like a very yin yang kind of a thing, because I was soft and fuzzy and understanding, and he'd go, oh, you just played that? You know what I think? I think it sucks. I think you better go back to the drawing board and fix that guitar part. He wasn't always that tough, but he could be,
I think you need that sometimes. You need both ends of the spectrum. Somebody being good cop, somebody being bad cop.
Oh, he would say it. He would say it in a way that was funny, though. He always had a sense of humor about it. I remember, like, sometimes he would look at you and he'd go like this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Just you think
that was a big thumbs down for our listeners.
Oh my God, he'd give you a big smile and then go, you know what I think, and then give you a thumbs down. It really, man, boy, does that take me back. He always had a sense of humor about it, but at the same time, that unescapable, brutal truth was also, he was exposing it. And for the better of the record and for the better of the player, whatever, there's no doubt that, you don't want to give an artist red light fever. If you guys, know what that is, you don't want to make an artist be nervous that when the red record light is on, that they can't be at their best.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, you can't just let them get away with crap. You're like, they have to do the work and get, especially back then on the day and, on the days of recording onto tape, which is what we did, which is that if you go back and listen to the Coward's Fourth World or any of those old records of mine that we're talking about, those are performances that are the band playing either live or overdubs. And that is the sound they are making. It's not faked.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can fix and tweeze and do all things ad nauseum in Pro Tools, in the computer now. So back then it was good to have a little Jerry Finn keeping you honest. I miss him. He was great. I miss that guy. He was fucking.
So my last question for you, Rob, when we were catching up in Cabo, your wife, Kim, mentioned that she works with a organization that's focused on mental health in the music business. And it seemed like that was something of a personal thing for you guys as to how you got involved with this organization. So I'm wondering why mental health is important for you and this organization in particular.
Well, certainly earlier in this podcast, you could hear everything I went through, which was just a very silent and personal kind of, I wanted to say torture or a tough time that I went through, like basically on my own. I got through it, got to the place where I was successful enough to afford to get help, right? But I couldn't talk about it. And I certainly never could think you could talk about it with your bosses or with your friends or anything else. I remember in college one time I did try to talk about it with one of my friends and he told me, "Ew, get the fuck away from me, you nuts." And I was like, and I felt worse, and he was like, "Have a fucking drink here, take 2 shots of whiskey." I was like, oh my God.
Sounds like college.
It's college. Yeah. I, beside my own personal torture, we've lost people. And so one of the ones that was just heartbreaking for me and really an eye opener that just, because I was so surprised and it made me realize how much I didn't know. I didn't know anything about how to deal with this, but I'd worked a lot with Linkin Park. And I was good friends with Chester and him and his wife. We were going to go out and have a double date. Like we had scheduled something and it was going to be in 2 months or something. And then the next thing he was gone. And I didn't know how he was suffering. I look back on it now and I can see the signs. Mm. But when I looked at it then, I couldn't tell anything. I couldn't tell. That guy was just happy to see me every time. He was such a lovely man, and a great talent in the studio. And he was such like a fun-loving kid almost. Like he had such enthusiasm and such a gifted singer. And he cared about getting it right, in the studio. He cared what everybody thought. And he really did the work to be a great singer and a great artist. I had no idea that he was suffering. So I had no idea that all this stuff was working in him. Probably the same way that no one had any idea of the crap that was going on in me either, right? Because that's just the way it was. Although I was lucky, right? I remember I said I was lucky. I found a way through it and I found a guy that would help me. But I could imagine if my traumas were worse and my situation was worse and I didn't have the luck of some friend telling me that, by the way, the guy who told me was a great TV producer. He was a TV producer that worked on a lot of big shows. So in a lot of ways, I hate to say it, but it's like money had a factor. I know it sounds kind of bougie, but I'm being honest. It's like, yeah, I had money. My friend had money. He was able to afford going to this super shrinker guy. Mm-hmm. And because I was friends with him, then I was able to go to the super shrinker guy to help me. Not these young kids, most people don't have money and they don't have the resources to get to the place where they have help. Yeah. So I'm going to do everything I can to help. I think if we can make it so that we can, have this outreach. I mean, there's this wonderful, wonderful charity called Music Cares. Mm-hmm. And if you don't know anything about it, anyone who's in the music business should just call them up. And if you need help, they'll probably give it to you. because it's amazing organization. We use it personally for our artists to help with certain things, whether it be doctor bills or whatever else. And Sound Mind Live is also an outreach place where if you are feeling these tough feelings with mental health that you can't seem to break free from or whatever, you call up Sound Mind Live and they refer you to people, and they help you get to counseling or whatever kind of stuff it is that you need.
That's awesome. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's an unfortunate reality that
we do
oftentimes the best care is reserved for the privileged, and so these organizations that do offer resources in these ways are so important, and so I commend you and your family for supporting them. It's a wonderful thing to be a part of,
and also to use that as a just a stepping stone for, like you say, your friend in college who wasn't there for you. Who, if someone comes to you and just says, "Hey, I'm struggling, I'm going through it right now," just being there and just not shooing them away and making them take a shot is the first step. You don't have to be a mental health professional to listen and to be a friend. So sometimes that's the first step, is just letting someone has the courage to come to you and say, "Hey, I'm going through something and I don't know who else to turn to, so I'm going to take a chance and say it to you." Don't waste that opportunity. Don't waste that brave choice that friend made to come to you. So,
yeah, it's a crazy thing when I think about it now. It's like when you're younger. I don't know. I'm in a funny place today, but I'm like, why did I ask that guy for help? If I was thinking about it, I should have asked this other guy. I would have got a much better answer than "get the fuck away from me." But and I don't blame that first guy. I really don't. Everybody's, he had no knowledge. It was a different time,
and perceptions have changed, like you say.
Yeah, and he also was like, he was ready to he probably wanted to escape his own demons and just go to the party and get drunk, which is fine. But it's, we're making the world a better place, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, that's a great place to wrap up, Rob. This has been a fascinating conversation, and we've covered so much between the work that you do and being so willing to be vulnerable about the things that have been challenges.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So, Rob Cavallo, it's been a pleasure. This has been another fascinating conversation on the Harder to Breathe podcast. New episodes every Tuesday, and we will see you next time. Thank you very much.